And it looks like we're stuck with that deadline of the 31st of August to get Western citizens out of Afghanistan. But what are the chances that that deadline might move? What do you think, Megyn?
Right now, he's saying it won't. Right now, he's saying that we're on pace to meet it, although he and his spokespeople are admitting that we're actually going to have the civilians out of Afghanistan well before the 31st, because we've got to get the military out by the 31st as well, according to his own self-imposed deadline, which he won't move. He says he's asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans in case we can't get the remainder out. We don't know what that means, but the Taliban, who we now answer to, they're clearly in control, and we just do as they say, has said, get out by August 31st. That's the deadline, and we intend to hold you to it, or, quote, there will be consequences. And rather than saying, we're the United States of America, and we'll get all of our people out, and if you don't like it, you'll suffer the consequences, we put our tail between our legs and keep kowtowing to the Taliban at every turn. That's how we got into this mess, and that's how we appear to be trying to get out of this mess. And we'll see whether we can actually do it, because there's almost no one who believes we can get all the American citizens and the Afghan allies we want out by August 31st. We've got the White House says 1,500 Americans still in there. OK, that's what the White House says. They say we've sent out 20,000 emails, 30,000 text messages to Americans trying to get them, to find out if they want to come to the airport. But meanwhile, they're saying to all the press corps in Washington, hey, if you've got any emails of any Americans that are stuck in Afghanistan, let us know. They don't know. They have no idea how many Americans are in Afghanistan right now. They're doing their best. But yet another example of how this has been mishandled from the start. And that's not even starting on patriots from Great Britain or the other NATO allies who are still stuck in there.
Megyn, this is a surrender of the highest order, and this is just not in the psyche of the American people to surrender. I mean, how's this news going down stateside?
Disastrously. Even the left-wing press that has been running cover for Joe Biden since he became the nominee against Donald Trump is apparently disgusted, because their coverage of him for once has been harsh, has been appropriately harsh. There are some running cover for him, but many are really going after him because it's an undeniable disaster. And I think most of us have not seen this country in this cowed posture in our lifetime. I mean, we're used to a strong, robust America with shoulders back and head up. And what we have now is an America that seems to track with Joe Biden's mental state: unstable, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous, right? And this debacle has been universally condemned, not just by Americans, but by our allies. When have you seen members of the British Parliament stand up and openly criticize the American president in a way where the Brits and the American people are nodding their heads? Yes, it's not controversial. It's something that the people all agree with. This is unrecognizable to me, to see the country behaving this way, to see him just fine with it, and to see him putting people in danger. Forget our military and our helicopters and our airplane, which we care about, but the civilians in danger for what? It's a self-imposed deadline.
Megyn, let's take a look at the president in action in the last 24 hours.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations. In addition, I've asked the Pentagon and the State Department for contingency plans to adjust the timetable, should that become necessary.
The most notable part of that non-press conference, in my view, Megyn, was the shameful moment that he turned his back on the press as they asked important questions, which remained unanswered. I mean, this is not an accountable president.
There are no press conferences with him. It's just reading off of a teleprompter for a few minutes, and then he walks out. That's it. That's not a press conference. We're getting more, sadly, from the vice president, who at least took a question or two on Afghanistan while she was jetting off to Singapore. But he says nothing. He will not answer the press. He sat for one interview with Democratic operative, now, quote, journalist George Stephanopoulos, and couldn't even handle the question Stephanopoulos gave to him. Joe Biden cannot handle it. And when you see him out there saying things, Mark, like, well, look, our military isn't having to run in and rescue American citizens throughout Afghanistan to try to get them to the airport in Kabul. We're not at that point where we're seeing video of precisely that. And our Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby, is coming to the press conferences saying, yeah, we are having to do that. Yes, it is a thing. We've sent helicopters out to go get stranded Americans. The president doesn't know what's going on. Meanwhile, he's talking about the 1,500 Americans he's still going to get out. He's not making promises on the Afghan citizens, and for good reason, because the Taliban has now said, no more Afghans, no more Afghan citizens. You can't have any more. We want our doctors, we want our scientists, we want our teachers to stay here. So even those people who have helped us are now technically on a list of those banned by the Taliban from leaving. But Jen Psaki, our White House spokesperson, says, oh, don't worry, people who have their papers in order, Afghan citizens are still going to be able to get out. Well, most of our Afghan helpers do not have their papers in order. They've been trying to get them in order for the past 5 years, but we've made it next to impossible for them to do so. So here's the bottom line. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Afghan citizens who helped us are going to be left behind. That's why we're seeing a run in the airport and sheer panic, especially among women and children who are going to be stuck under Taliban rule.
Now, Megyn, it's very clear that previous presidents have a case to answer. Bush, perhaps, Obama, and even Donald Trump, who penciled in that deal with the Taliban towards the tail end of his presidency. But that deal came with terms and conditions, and many Americans will be thinking now and wondering whether Donald Trump might have handled this differently, and frankly, he couldn't have handled it worse. Yeah, well, that's the thing. So I can't defend Trump on the deal he struck with the Taliban because it was a terrible deal. It just was. We basically pretended that we could trust them and that we were going to pull out all of our troops because they were making all these promises, and only if they lived up to them would we then go forward with it. But they really hadn't even lived up to their promises at the moment they were signing the deal. So we never trusted the Taliban. President Trump wanted the troops out, period. And at that point, we had more like 15,000 troops in, and I understand he wanted that gone. In my view, it never had to go down as low as it was. We had 2,500 there when Joe Biden started pulling the last of them home, and we were doing okay with that number. Granted, it was under a tete-a-tete with the Taliban, but maybe we needed, let's say, 4,000 to stay and keep the peace and stop this place from becoming an al-Qaeda home base again or an ISIS home base. President Trump decided, no, they're all going, and you can take your disagreements with that. What I don't believe is that President Trump would have allowed this exit to go down the way it was. He wouldn't have allowed our country to be embarrassed the way it has been. He certainly would not have allowed American civilians to be rescued off the top of the embassy, to place our troops in danger, or to start sending the troops home before we got all of our civilians out, before we got all of our diplomats out. Ask any man in uniform, and he will tell you that's exactly the opposite of the order in which we are supposed to do things. Our hardened, tough military guys and gals, they're the last to leave. They understand that. They get all the civilians out. We were doing it in exactly the wrong order. Megyn, briefly, if you can, because we're going to get the break and cover some big stories after that. But do you put this decision down to Biden himself? Is it a sort of Biden misjudgment, or is this a sort of wider strategy of the Democratic Party? Because I really want to understand whether essentially he's just made a colossal error of judgment, or whether it's the administration that are at fault.
Well, there's a blame game going on in Washington that looks like that right now, where the top generals and the Secretary of State and others are leaking to the press. We warned him. And the White House is coming out saying none of the warnings was explicit enough. They didn't have high confidence. So the president didn't have the information. But even the White House has admitted that the warnings that he understood, President Biden understood, that in 6 months the Taliban was going to take over. So don't kid yourself. President Biden knew very well that Afghanistan was going back under the control of the Taliban, if not within 11 days of withdrawal, then within 6 months of withdrawal, and he was just fine with that. It's only once it was clear to him it was becoming a political disaster that he changed his tune, came up with another plan to try to expedite the removal of American citizens. It's too late. We already saw the people hanging from the planes. We know our people are in danger. This is on him, squarely.
Let's talk about Donald Trump, Megyn. He was famously banned from social media whilst the Taliban stayed on there. Typically hypocritical of one of those US tech giants. But Trump may be back on YouTube soon, we're told.
Well, maybe, maybe not. Depends on how his legal case goes. He's filed 3 lawsuits against these tech giants for banning him. The ban by YouTube was indefinite. The ban by Twitter was permanent. And the ban from Facebook was, I think, till 2023. So he's trying to fight all of those in court. And his principal argument, he's got a few arguments, but his principal argument is that even though these are private companies and therefore wouldn't normally be subject to the First Amendment in our Constitution, which guarantees the right of free speech, among other rights, that they've effectively become government actors because they've A, gotten so big, and B, they have taken direction from the government, so they're essentially acting as the government, and therefore do have to be neutral when it comes to their treatment of content, which would mean you can't discriminate against someone because they're a Republican, for example, versus a Democrat. So that's essentially the basis of his lawsuit. I might be being slightly generous to him in my description of it, but if he can get it to there, he's sort of one off of there, if he can get it to there, I think he's got a decent argument as long as he can articulate it a little bit better than he did in his initial papers.
But does he need, Megyn, those platforms to get back into the White House in 3 years' time? I mean, could he argue that actually without those platforms, he's fomenting further support among his base?
I don't know. I think he does need them. I mean, I think they were huge, huge points of access for him. And by the way, huge points of selling merchandise, which A, lined the coffers of his campaign, bank accounts, but B, and I know this from interviewing Brad Parscale, who ran his campaign both times around. They used the purchases of merchandise to see where support was gathering, but unexpected. And then they would flood those areas with Trump ads and maybe a campaign stop and so on. And that's really how Trump won in 2016. So they would love to use those sites for purchases of merch in addition to messaging. And especially with the mainstream media loathing Trump, they're not going to do to him this time around, if he runs again, what he did the last time, which is just give him tons of, quote, unearned media, meaning just put him on television for free. CNN was probably the worst perpetrator of that. I mean, it really was unfair to the other candidates, but they did it because he's a ratings god. He is. Whatever you want to say about Trump, he's a ratings king. But this time, I think they've realized the political consequences of doing that, and they'd be much less likely to, and there'd be blowback from their viewers if they did. So he does need a strong social media presence.
Megyn, clearly what matters to the Republican Party is to unseat the Democrats at the next presidential elections and get a Republican in the White House. Is Donald Trump definitely their best option? What about the freedom-loving Florida governor, Ron DeSantis?
Yeah, I don't know if Trump is their best option because he comes with a lot of baggage. He's beloved by a strong section of the Republican Party, but he's also got the highest name recognition now. So he's going to win most polls, today on who should be the nominee. But, people are looking at Governor Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida, as the next most likely and best known candidate because he's kind of like Trump without the tweets. Now, personally, I don't know how he does. I've heard from people who know him and are in political circles. He may not be the nicest candidate to spend time with, but does anyone care? At this point, we're looking at our politicians like, is Joe Biden super nice to spend time with? Maybe. Not if you ask Tara Reid, the woman who accused him of sexual harassment, but maybe. Do we really care about that, or do we care about policy, right? I'm told Winston Churchill was a little rough around the edges, but a great leader, right? So what we need is someone who can lead, who can put both good policy into place. And DeSantis is like a dream for Republican voters when it comes to policy. And he's shown a strong spine, which Republican candidates in the past, like Mitt Romney, typically did not show. It's one of the things they loved about Trump.
Well, for sure. I mean, do you think Trump is serious about having a tilt at the White House again this time round? Or is this just, hyperbole and publicity seeking?
Mark, if I could get into the head of Donald Trump, my life would have been handled very differently over the past few years. No, I have no idea. All I can guess is that he doesn't actually want to go back into the White House, but he wants to keep the levers of control, going, and he likes very much keeping people on his leash and driving the national conversation, and he doesn't owe anyone anything in terms of not doing it. And I don't think he loves it when another Republican like DeSantis gets more attention than he does, right? That's why he's the ratings king, because he knows how to get attention, and he came to know it because he's so good at it and he needs it, right? So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I had to put money on it, would say Trump's not going to run. He's already won, and he lost the second election. He doesn't admit that, but I don't think he wants to set himself up for a third run that might not go his way.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.